My name is Terrence Barkin. I'm the Executive Director of the Graphene Council, and we are hosting today's webinar to introduce Gerdau Graphene, a newly formed company in this space, to you, the community. And we're going to do that through a dialogue with Alex Correa, who is the CEO and the lead of this project for Gerdau, which is a well-established, extremely large and successful steel company with a long pedigree out of Brazil. And with that, Alex, why don't you go ahead and just go introduce yourself and tell us about Gerdau Graphene.
Sure. So thank you. It's been an honor to be here with you and share a bit of how we see the market and also how we about what we're composing of the company. The idea here, as we spoke, Terrence, is really to have a quick overview of Gerdau and Gerdau Graphene, and then I'll leave most of the time we have together for questions and also for us to talk a little bit and share our vision on the market. It'll be more productive and interesting for the team. Okay, so a quick overview first about Gerdau, right? So thank you for your introduction. Gerdau is a 120-year history, old company here in Brazil. We actually started producing nails and went to become one of the largest steel manufacturers in the world. Today we're a leading company in the long steel supply in the Americas region. Also one of the largest special steels producer globally, right? And really, in a nutshell, what we do is today we gather iron, right, from its purest form, either in iron ore or also recycled. Most of all, what we do today comes from recycling. 70% of the iron we use comes from recycling sources, right? And we apply technology there to make steel. So one of the very noble materials we have today in the world, one of the very leading materials today. And we take this a step further then, and we apply all our customer intimacy, our knowledge of the end markets to make out of this steel components and products from our customers, right? Or very high-end products there. So in a way, it's very similar to what the industry is trying to do now with graphene. Really, this is a very new material, right? We're shy of 17 years of existence, so still beginning to pick up as a material. But there's huge potential in graphene to become also one of the leading materials in the world. In a way, again, this is what this has been doing, right? We're taking graphite, transforming it with technology into graphene, a very prestigious material, right? And then the next step, which we believe is really where the revolution will come in industries, is how do you make graphene into end products, right, or end materials that can be easily applied in the industry, right? So something we've been doing with steel for 20 years, so we're very comfortable now doing it also with graphene as the next step, right? When we talk about the company today, we're located in the Americas region. It's our main focus, right? So a very large operation, as you mentioned, over 26 industrial facilities throughout the region, right? Mostly in Brazil and the US, but also throughout other countries in the region. A few iron ore, several commercial units, right? And as of the second half of last year, we opened a new division called Gerdau Next. The mission for Gerdau Next really is to bring new operations and new companies into the Gerdau ecosystem that are adjacent to the steel business, right? So we're building the future of Gerdau here. Even though this is still also a new operation, we already have 8 new companies in the group for Gerdau Next, one of which is Gerdau Graphene, right? We are operating both in Latin America as well as in the US or North America in general, right? And then as part of Gerdau Graphene, we have also our R&D center in Great Britain, right? So to show you a bit of our footprint in the region, right? And if you take a deeper dive into Gerdau Next, really, our really aspiration here is how do we really make the future of Gerdau, right? So really, our mission is, as a group, is also to diversify our portfolio of products. Really, how do we look into 5 key sectors and bring new business that are adjacent to the steel? And really, it's all about, on one side, how do we as a Gerdau keep really investing in technology and operational excellence in our core business in steel, but also how to use all that knowledge, all those assets, to really invest in new ventures that will be the Gerdau of the future, right? So as an ambition really is really how does this become a relevant part of the business? We're talking about in 10 years having 20% of our revenue coming from all these new operations. So roughly at today's value, something like $2 billion in revenue coming from new business. So it's quite a large ambition, and we're very honored to be part of this mission as Gerdau Graphene, right? The key areas Gerdau Next has been investing in this last year has been the construction sector, the infrastructure and logistics sector, right? All the renewable energy projects, recycling as a whole, and then adjacent materials and advanced and new materials and new technologies, right? And this is where Gerdau Graphene was born. We are the first spin-off in this chapter of advanced materials, so leading also this chapter for Gerdau Next, right? And all the applications we do here have a digital touch to them, right? So we're really seeing how to apply technology in digital operations in all these five main chapters, right? Even though Gerdau Next has a roughly a year now, our work with graphene has also a longer history. We've been working at graphene as Gerdau for the past 4 years. Actually, our interest in graphene started as part of an R&D approach in our special steels division. So basically looking at graphene as a different raw material we could take to our automotive clients. So initially all the work we were doing was basically in coatings, right, for the automotive sector. We began by having a R&D center looking at graphene specifically here in Brazil. We took that a step further. We thought there's a lot of interest, a lot of potential in that material, so we decided to become part of the GEEK and really and see the potential of this material as a new business unit. And with the appearance of Gerdau Next, we actually thought this could go even further and become a new company, which we just created last month, right? So this is really, so it's a 4-year history we already have with the material. When we talk about Gerdau Graphene itself, right, our mission is really how do we transform graphene into end solutions that are very easily available to the industry. Really, our proposal here is how to help the industry make this scalable, help the industry make this as frictionless as possible. And I'll talk a little bit about this in the future, in the next slides. And basically, we're talking about 4 key areas of application, right? And then 2 special segments we're looking into. So about in the commercial aspect, we're looking basically at how do we source graphene, and then with this graphene, we produce additives for concrete. How do you produce booster packs or additives for lubricants? How do you make special coatings or also components for coatings, right? And also how do you produce polymers or master batches with graphene? So those are our 4 main areas of operation. On top of that, also we have 2 special areas we're looking to. So energy storage overall, and in the energy storage chapter, we have a very strong partnership we've developed with Mora. Mora is the leading battery producer in Latin America. So today we are their key developer for graphene application in the product lines, right? And then also a special chapter goes into CVD, graphene, and sensor application. So basically, we're looking to partnerships with CVD companies and sensor companies to help accelerate the application of graphene into this market, right? Even though we're a very new company, shy of a month old, right? I think we start already with some key clients working with us. So Moda, which I mentioned earlier, and also SKF. SKF has actually been our client and partner for the past 4 years since we started this project as an R&D still aspect inside Gerdau as a corporate level. And then throughout these 4 years, we developed several different projects with them, some of which are in final development and testing phase today. And once we started mentioning to them about the creation of a new company, we went a step further and we really developed a strong collaborative work. So today, in South America, we are working very closely with SKF, having our development team working together with their product and engineering and also industrial teams to really see how can we add value from graphene into their new launches and new products, and also the pain points of the existing products. So it's a very strong collaborative work. We're very honored to work with them, and it's the model we probably want to take to other customers as we grow as a company, right? But I think a question that really we asked ourselves in this journey to open the company was, why hasn't graphene really accelerated? Of course, it's still new, right? But how could we do to help this industry really pick up and gain scale and speed, right? And today we see there's a gap between what's offered today in terms of graphene products and really the demand from the clients on the other side. So typically what we see today from not all companies, but from most companies, is that they will approach an end user like Gerdau with graphene or their materials and say, we would like to make a joint development with you to have an application work, an application of graphene in one of your products, right? So basically there is an initial hurdle with the R&D teams finding the solution, right? And once that's done, the second step, which is how do you bring that to the industrial level, right? So how do you go to the existing assets, existing machineries and processes that a client has, and you apply graphene in an industrial scalable way, right? And that's the main gap there is today in making this industry really grow, is how do we make some application graphene as frictionless, as simple as possible into what exists today in terms of the industry, right? So this is where we're positioning ourselves. Our vision is really how do we produce these additives, these materials that can be sent to these end industries as frictionless as possible. And it all comes down to having a very intimate understanding of the end application, the end industry, as well as the material itself and its different forms and functionalization rates, right? So basically, we begin the company as a true believer in open innovation. We believe that's the best way to really accelerate this market. Is how can we build ecosystems of joint development work, joint R&D, and really joint application work to make sure that we really bridge this gap between the graphene producers, right, and the end users and their demands in terms of application, right. The key to do this is all about technology, all about application work. And then once this is well done, the better version will bring to the market really is how do we provide additives again or materials that are performance enhancing, quickly scalable to different levels of the demands of the industry, but also are plug and play or as frictionless as possible, right? And the way we see this is all about having the right R&D and the right application work, right? So to do that, our foundation stone has been the GEEK. We have been a tier 1 member for the GEEK for the past 2 years. It's also been very strong partnership, very great honor to work with them. And this is where we really breathe and take all the knowledge we have, intimacy with graphene, its dispersion technology, its innovation by itself, and all the different functionalizations we can have in the material. As part of our roadmap this year, we're taking a step further and building 2 proprietary Gerdau Graphene R&D centers here in Brazil, then focus on the application. So really, the key here is building centers that are really understanding industrial processes of our end clients, right? So taking, for example, in the plastic sector, what are the injection cycles, the temperatures, the flows, and all the processes involving in producing a plastic, right, with graphene enhanced, and how can that either enhance get the performance we want, or how can there also be a restriction to using graphene? So the idea is how to really understand intimately also the industrial processes of the customers to be the best way to apply the graphene in these products, right? And then finally, the link between these 2 centers is also having a further knowledge in the material graphene is being applied into itself, right? So as a third block here, we are also opening R&D centers in key material centers in the world. So an example of work we've been doing is with the DIK Center. It's the leading rubber center in Germany. So the idea is how do we really intimately know the material itself? So in this case, for example, rubber, and all the demands it has for performance, all the innovation that's going behind it, and all the restrictions or the application forms it has. How do you, on the other side, really intimately know graphene also and its dispersion and its functionalization and changes? And finally, how do you add these 2 knowledge bases into knowing the industrial end process to really then produce an additive or a material with graphene that will be easily used by the end industry, right? So in a nutshell, we're talking about how do we make it real, really? How do we make the industry see the solution, graphene as a solution, not as another material? It's really what our journey has been. And then really our invitation is for the community to really join us in this and really join us to make this happen as quickly as we can, really scale the industry, right? So and a quick, introduction, that's what I had, just to showcase a bit of our company and how we look at the market, Terence. I guess we can then move into questions or discussion on the market.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. There's just so much to learn from this presentation that you just gave. It's very enlightening to think about, how you've looked at the market, how you came to where you guys are today. So let me start with just a couple of basic questions. So you mentioned the GEEK a few times as being a pivotal resource for you guys. So that's the Graphene Engineering Innovation Center that's based at the University of Manchester. If anybody's not yet familiar with that, and it's affectionately called the GEEK. It's one of 3 facilities there at the university, another one being the National Graphene Institute, and the other one, which is more recent, is the Henry Royce Center for Advanced Materials. Now, as a Tier 1 member at the GEEK, that means Gerdau actually had staff on site at the facilities. Can you just talk about how you came to that decision? Because you've gone all the way from being introduced to graphene, thinking of it as a enhancement for your existing steel products, to where you are today, and that GEEK seems to have played an important role. Can you just talk about what was the advantage of being based there?
Sure. I think when we were looking at this material again 2 years ago, we really saw the potential we could have of using it again in our own products, or also in products we to provide jointly with our steel products to customers, right? And then there came a demand from us, if you are to do this correctly, you really have to understand and be able to work with the material in the best way possible, right? And when we started looking where would be the best place to acquire the technology, of course, we came at the GEEK. I think the reasons we reached out to the GEEK, first, it's where it all was born, right? The graphene was first isolated in the University of Manchester, so there's a lot of history, there's a lot of activity happening around Manchester with the GEEK. I think Manchester is quickly positioning themselves as being the city, the graphene city, right? So we think there's a lot of action there, not only knowledge and R&D, but also I think the community is converging there. So we see a lot of potential partners, our potential suppliers, a lot of new researchers orbiting around that place, right? So I think there's also the value of the technology and the facility and the assets we have there, but also the networking we can have with the community around graphene, right? So the decision was, if we want to do this correctly, we really have to know the material intimately, be able to do our own R&D, our own patent work, our own research on graphene and graphene applications. So that's really when the decision came. And as you correctly mentioned, the decision of becoming a tier one was actually opening an R&D lab at the GEEK, right? So today we have a Gerdau employee leading the lab in Manchester, right? And the idea is that we should also increase that staff moving forward, really having a very strong R&D work together with their scientists and also their engineers, right?
Excellent. That makes perfect sense. It's interesting also the fact that, Gerdau is a Brazilian company, because if we look at, graphene heretofore, we've seen, for example, Australia plays a big role with several companies out of Australia that are quite active in graphene. Korea, Singapore, Europe, the US and Canada, for example, are all really strong players. And so can you just talk a little bit about the role of graphene in Brazil? Because in particular, obviously the Graphene Council, for example, by the way, we did incorporate recently in Manchester to be part of that ecosystem. And then we also have an office together with McGrath Institute, which is in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Talk about the role of graphene as you see it in Brazil, which of course has quite important graphite resources.
For sure. Yeah, I think that graphene is really picking up as a very strong and important material for Brazil, and I think it has two main reasons, right? The base one, as you mentioned, is today Brazil has the largest source of graphite globally, not only in volume but also in quality. You have a very high quality graphite, in the country, right? So for sure that makes it a strategic material for us. If we can transform those mineral resources into a very high-end product, for sure it's very relevant for the country as a whole, right? And to have a deeper look into that, right? But I think independently of that, there has been general interest in graphene overall. I think that the industry and the researchers and the universities have also really found the charm of this material. So if you go today to Brazil, as you mentioned, there are several interesting and high-end research facilities or universities working with graphene, right? So McGrath at Mackenzie here in São Paulo is one of them. You have two very strong centers also in Minas Gerais, so Citinano and Macrafeno. In the south, you have UX, right, graphene also. So, and on top of that, we have also several other initiatives with companies, with private sector also looking to graphene as an interesting material, right? So I think that's also that technology push in a way, or that technology interest from both the industry level, but also the university level, has also been helping drive this material and its importance in the region too, right? So I think that's a very interesting topic, and we see it picking up globally. We also see it picking up also as a relevant material here in Brazil too, right?
Yeah. Well, it's of course worth noting that Brazil has one of the largest economies in Latin America in the region, and one of the largest economies in the world, frankly, and important automotive, aerospace, sectors as well that could benefit from this material. By the way, I know that we're going to get quite a number of questions for you about the company. I just want to let everybody know there may be some questions that we cannot answer because of antitrust regulations and other reasons. So I just want to point that out, so that if there are some questions posed that we can't answer, that might be the reason why. And also there are trade secrets and corporate strategy reasons why they may not be able to be answered. Now, having said that, I do want to ask you, At this moment, it's correct that Gerdau itself is not actually producing graphene yet, but that you're sourcing graphene from different sources. Is that correct?
That's correct. So we had some small production together with the GEEK for our own development work, but overall the strategy is we're sourcing that graphene. The idea is to find the ideal product, right, in terms of its quality, its scalability, and its price, right. And what we'll produce really is additives or enhanced products with graphene, really. So our vision is how do we take the graphene, and then out of graphene we make again a special type of coating, an additive for lubricants or additive for concrete, and that's actually what we'll manufacture and sell to the market. Right.
Excellent. Well, we've spoken about this on the Graphene Council numerous times about, one of the amazing things about graphene is it can be used in so many different vertical applications. So there's just tremendous opportunities. The other thing we've observed where a lot of graphene companies have struggled, they've got great science, they know how to make graphene, but getting it to market seems to be quite difficult. Understanding, because the potential ecosystem is so large. Now, with Gerdau Graphene, you guys come from a large industrial scale thinking, right? So you don't do things on a small scale.
No.
I think it's quite fascinating that you've picked this spot of doing the value add and connecting to the end user groups. How do you see this leveraging your existing client base? And is that where you see the real opportunity, or are you really looking at new markets, new customers?
When we looked, so these past 5 months, we've been doing a very strong deep dive into each one of the applications, and then I think it's also, I really like to recognize a lot of that was supported by the Graphene Council, since you're a member. So thank you for also the support on that research. But overall, we looked at all the potential 55 or so applications that we have, and we took 3 looks at three, let's say, angles at that look, right? So basically, how readily available was the technology, so it's what was the TRL of the technology, and once you were to enter the end use, also how long it would take for the end user to apply that and bring it to markets. For example, making a new product in the automotive or aerospace sector has its timing, which is different than a CPG company, for example. So we looked at both the technology itself and also the new product availability to the market. So that was one angle we took at it. The other one was, of course, the synergies they would have with our existing ecosystems. And then we're looking both at the client base, but also at the supply base, right? Since we are a very large industrial company, we have also several suppliers who could also become clients using these materials, right? So Gerdau could become the first mover specifying a product for ourselves, and that could also become a product that our supplier, once he would supply that to us, he could provide to the market using our graphene additive in a way, right? So we looked at both sides of the chain, and then finally, of course, we looked at how the potential in terms of market revenue, in terms of margins of those markets, right? So that's the way we took at it, and again, of course, the synergies with Gerdau are very important, and they're very important for this first beginning of the company, right? But we try to take as most of an industry agnostics approach as possible, right? Trying to see it as not trying to have that as a main point to really drive a decision, right? So, but going back to your question today, if you look at the sectors we're there, for sure, the construction sector is a sector we lead in Brazil, and we have a very strong presence in the U.S. market, right? We're a key rebar supplier, key supplier of other steel components for the construction sector. So for sure, there's a huge synergy in the supply chain, in the client base we can definitely use to leverage our first applications, right? The same thing in the automotive sector, in the oil and gas sector, right, and other industries that use steel, right? So for sure, the idea is that we'll start using those levers, right, to accelerate the company. But then for sure, once we grow as a company, we're open to looking at other sectors that not necessarily our sectors we supply to today, right?
Yeah, no, totally understand that. I think, and we've said this to many of our members and just the industry at large. If you picked any one of these large verticals, you could spend the next 10 years just exploiting the one vertical instead of chasing 20 different markets at once. So we totally agree with this view that graphene is maturing, and this seems to be really an inflection point for the material. And I think the emergence of a company like Gerdau Graphene is evidence that this is maturing, because a decision to invest to the level that your company has and with the expectations is not done lightly. And so I think that's quite important. We just recently had an update on the commercial market, and we acknowledge that the current production capacity worldwide is somewhere in the 10,000 metric tons per annum of graphene bulk material. So that's multi-layer, dry powder and paste and slurries and this type of material, with the largest nameplate producer right now being NanoXplore with 4,000 metric tons per annum in their facility in Canada. But if you look at any of these vertical markets, we're looking at an addressable market for graphene, even with a fairly limited number of markets, which include all of the markets that you're targeting. It's 500,000 to 600,000 metric tons per annum. So my question is, tomorrow, Alex, a customer comes to you and says, yes, we want to put graphene in this and we need, 30,000 metric tons a year. What are you going to do? I mean, how do we cover? I mean, do you see this as maybe the next, major concern is once it goes over the transom and we actually get large orders, how do we fulfill them?
For sure, I think this is a concern, and we already been speaking to a few clients who've brought that up to our attention. It's interesting. Just this past week, I had two clients mention that they were well advanced in application work for graphene, and the reason they stopped was when they reached a certain level of development work. They went back to the current supplier developer and said, I will need this as an initial order, and they weren't very comfortable with the replies. So maybe we can stop here. So I think this is something we have to tackle as an industry for sure. So it's something we are talking with our current partners of how to jointly invest or how to jointly grow the supply base to make sure that we address that today, right? But I think really to us the key is that we first have to open the market, right? And then once that's done, for sure the resources will be available to really have the supply base following that up. I think one of the challenges is that if you talk to many R&D centers, R&D directors or companies, most people know about graphene. There's a general interest in the charm of graphene, right? But then when actually you ask them, okay, how do you apply it? What is really the end application you're seeing? What's the commercial application that you'll be driving with graphene? There's still doubts about that, right? And then once you talk, okay, how do you actually then have it in your process, in industrial process, it becomes even cloudier, right? So I think the main thing we have to do as an industry, that's one of our key I think missions as a company, is really how do we educate the end customer, really. So one thing we're starting as of now with the new company being open is how do we really help educate and tell the general public what are the applications which are already available today, which we could have graphene already applied, what are the benefits that can be expected, and then also how to do that on an industrial scale that is frictionless. I think once that's done, for sure we'll have a second challenge, which is picking up volumes. But I think having the market for that, the resources will be there from us for sure, right? But also I think from in general, people will definitely be able to scale. Many of these projects, as you mentioned, are scalable or quickly scalable to higher volumes. The reason they haven't picked up with more volumes is just a matter of not having the market to do the investments, right? So I think technology to scale is there. I think what hasn't appeared yet is a demand to make that happen, right?
Well, yeah, I think your observation is spot on. We've also, been saying for a while now, the competition's not really between graphene companies, but it's between graphene and legacy materials and this adoption curve. What are some of the other, from your perspective, and again, I know you guys have evaluated this whole kind of value chain and supply chain issues. Where do you see the main choke points? So we've talked about scalability, we talked about customer education. What are some of the other issues?
I think there's four main choke points, right? So let's go from let's say how we see it in the temporal form. I think the first one, of course, is the education, right? So first is going to the market in a very structured way, a very technical way, and say this is looking at with their lenses, right? With their lens to their customers. Okay, for your products, these are the benefits or the performance gains we see with graphene. This is why. This is how you can achieve it, right? So that's the first. I think so far as an industry, we're looking more in with our lens of okay, where should you use graphene? Not thinking of again, what really are the pain points or the innovation developments that the end customers need, right? So that's putting ourselves in their shoes and seeing how graphene can be a solution, an answer for them, rather than just trying to push technology up the chain. So that's the first point I think that we have to really tackle. The second one, once you do that, is how do you make this as frictionless as possible, right? So we have, again, I think there's a lot of work being done so far on the dispersion of graphene, which is key since it's a very new material. We have to take that to the next level and think about what are the restraints, the concerns, and also the optimizations we can have for the different industries we're working with. And again, each industry has this at a different level, a different way of looking at, right? So in a way, is how you take graphene, it's dispersed form or it's substrate form, and you put that and develop that into, again, an additive, a product that can be easily processed, analyzed, audited, and incorporated in existing industrial assets, right? I think once we have the graphene market well developed, for sure, companies may invest in specific assets or machinery or processes for the graphene use. But now that we're starting the industry, we need to make sure we make it as much as friction as possible for the existing assets and processes and so on, right? So that's the second choke point we see, right? The third one, for sure, then it comes to pricing. I think today, because even though there is this gap between supply and demand, most of the approach in graphene has been on niche markets. So there is value there in having the right pricing for these niche applications and the performance it brings. But also at the current price levels, there are a lot of solutions which are locked out, right? So one thing also we've been doing these past 5 months is really looking at these potential markets or potential end products, looking at their cost composition, their feedstock, right? And say, okay, if you were to apply graphene at this level, what is the impact in costing versus the impacts in pricing they can have with the performance gain they have? And then you have several opportunities you would unlock at graphene at $20 a kilo, $10 a kilo, $5 a kilo, $1 a kilo, right? So I think really the game is not just pushing prices down. You have to find an equilibrium between the right pricing to open volume together with the right pricing to really have the value back on the graphene supply chain in the performance gains you have, right? So, but I think the equation today is still, the price is still too high. The balance, the point will probably be a little bit lower than it is currently today, right? And that also comes through education again, because many times people are still looking at the performance gain you can have in the end product per se. There's a lot of value in the process gains that you can have with graphene, right? And then by not knowing your client's process intimately, it's hard to see that value or even show that value, right? So I think it's all about what is maybe the price gain he can have, but also what is the savings or the operational gain he can have in his whole supply chain, right? So those are two key points, right? So I think, and then finally, once all that's done, then I think the last choke point is how about having the scalability of the right volume to supply the demand, right? So I think the way we see it is this step-by-step approach. So again, the way we're tackling the market again is how do we first help educate and grow the market? How do you provide solutions that are frictionless to the market to be able to then accelerate and open those markets correctly? We believe once that's done, we can have the right value proposition in terms of pricing, right? And then finally, it's all about the volume, right? So
I think you describe it perfectly, and it's something that we've seen. So, for example, and this will lead to another question for you about a key market. So, for example, we've seen an awful lot of interest in cement and concrete applications, and if you talk to people in the industry, yes, getting more compressive strength is interesting, but often it's not necessary because the concrete is strong enough, right? But what might be more interesting is maybe the thermal transfer properties or the flex that you get. But what's really interesting when you come back to the process is, accelerating the cure rate, right? So now you can complete a job much quicker, and that has value to it. So, the other aspect that we've talked about before is that with graphene, especially used in this way as an additive, right, as a catalyst or an additive in a process, we're often using extremely small amounts. So even the high price point on a per unit basis, it sounds prohibitively expensive, but in fact, it's not. So when you look at concrete, for example, where do you see the opportunities for that particular market? And then the other question I want to combine with that, one of our guests watching wanted to know, what types of graphene are you looking at? Because there's graphene oxide, reduced graphene oxide, graphene nanoplatelets. There's all these different forms. Maybe if you talk a little bit about if you're focused on particular types of graphene, and you also mentioned functionalization, and that's another flavor of graphene, if you will. So can you maybe address those, the cement concrete market, but then also what types of graphene are you looking at?
Okay, so I think initially we're looking mostly at nanoplatelets, right? And then again, we have a special chapter in looking what we can do with CVD, what are different CVD technologies, and how can we look at that, right? And then the next step, as you correctly mentioned, is we're partnering with a few companies and also doing some of our own work on how can we functionalize graphene, right? So I think that's the next step in how to have it in the right way to disperse and apply, right? So that's basically when we go to again the concrete segment, then I think you've covered most of the value we see for sure. So again, there is, I mean, the basic value, or the most spoken value is how do you have more resistance per dollar, right? And the end concrete you're providing, right? So that's for sure is a value that is, I think, more easily reached and sold to the market, right? But for sure, we see some applications or some gains in cure time. For sure, the thermal protection, even anti-corrosive or anti-oxidation protection to make these materials last longer. If you go specific to the northern hemisphere, right, there's also a gain you can have from avoiding the whole cycle in high freeze regions and changes in temperature throughout the year, right, and in the product. So that's also a gain we're seeing for a niche market in particular, right? But also, I think another interesting gain is how you talk about building structures that are lighter, right? I think when you look about also, of course, sometimes you don't need the resistance that you gain from the material, but having a lighter structure overall can be a benefit for the construction area, right? So the construction sector. So really, that's something we're looking at, and how that can help us facilitate other types of operations and building models really in open segments there.
Excellent. Excellent. We received a number of different comments, all kind of touching on the same point. They revolve around research and development. So, what's the future with continuing at the GEEK? Do you see putting people actually inside companies working with their R&D departments? What do you see happening in Brazil? There's MJ Grafeno and there's the McGrath Institute. Plus, you're going to have a dedicated facility. So just talk a little bit about the strategy, to the extent you can, about that R&D, that application development piece, which is absolutely critical. I mean, basically with graphene, we have to create our own customers, right?
Exactly.
Like you have to grow them. So what's your vision, and how multi-pronged is this R&D approach that you think you're going to deploy? What does that look like?
Okay, sure. So I think and this is again more of a vision, since we're starting the company for sure.
I mean, you're a month old.
Exactly.
You should have it figured out.
Yes, these things will change, but for sure, I think there are some fundamentals we don't see changing on the future, right? So for sure, we see our partnership with the GEEK just growing, and our team growing there. We see a huge value in being there and staying there, and as we grow, more and more demand will come of working there. So that's for sure something we'll keep, right? On the other side, I think there is part of our DNA is coming from Gerdau, is how do we really develop technology from Brazil, in Brazil, and how do we really export local Brazilian technology to the world, right? So I think also there is, in our vision, really, it's key for us to have our own R&D and our R&D center in Brazil. And really, there is a huge and very well developed science base and technology base here. We can really work together and export, right? So for sure, the idea is to have local Brazilian technology export to the world, and being very proud that it's coming from here, right? So as we grow our R&D network, we see a lot of it also being done here. On the other hand, we are born as a global company, right? We already have our own operation. So our head office is in Brazil, but we already have our own operation in the US, and the idea is to expand in the region overall. So of course, we will have to have also centers throughout the region. And also when we talk about material centers focusing on material science, or the material we're applying graphene to, we're taking a holistic approach, saying, well, where is the best center for each kind of material, independently of where it's located. So for example, it might be in Germany, it might be somewhere else in Europe, it might be in Asia, right? So that's one point. I think the final thing I've been challenging my team a lot is when we look at today, the very connected global world, right? Asia is and will always become and grow as an interesting and key market, both on the material side, also at the demand side, right? Yeah. And if you look specifically in graphene, most of the patents are coming from there. There's a lot of work in graphene in Asia. There's a lot of work in the materials and the end products coming in Asia, right? So you go to the energy storage, it's a very interesting, very vibrant market in terms of technology, right? So one thing I've always challenged my team is if you want to become really a leader in a relevant company in the R&D of graphene, we have to be in Asia, right? So I think this is not in our short-term roadmap, but for sure somewhere along our journey, we will establish, I think, R&D centers in Asia. I think it's critical to be there. It is critical to build a link there. And when I look at the graphene industry in comparison to other industries I've worked for in the past, I still see a gap also in connecting, let's say, the Asian market, the Asian technology back to us here, right, in the Americas or even in Europe. Other markets have this more well connected, the exchange of technology, the exchange of development, right? I still see a few companies, of course, have that connection. As you mentioned, a few companies based in Australia or Singapore being closer have, let's say, a stronger bond both to our market here and the Asian market, right? But overall, I still see a huge gap in that connection. So I think that also an important part is how do we really have that R&D in a global aspect, and again, markets are different. The demands from markets in Asia and the customers are different than here, but there's potential also in having application work there too. So it's how do we also connect and really take advantage of the demands we have both here as well as in Asia in terms of markets and customers.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to try to put you on the spot with this one, because when we talk about Asia, we really need to make a distinction between mainland China and the rest of Asia, right? Because the Japan, Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, these behave differently. There is obviously a shift. At least this is our observation. This is my words, not yours. If we look at mainland China, that there are some geopolitical shifts that are taking place. That China is being viewed as a strategic competitor for many, Western economies, if you will. And graphene does have some national defense and security issues with some of those applications. So I think, and then on top of that, because the PRC has identified graphene as a strategic material for a number of years now. And this is direct from talking to entities in China, our counterparts in China. There's between 3,000 to 6,000 to 18,000 different companies, depending on how you count it, that are involved in graphene. It's a very complex, non-transparent market in terms of, quality, application, trustworthy partners, all this sort of thing. So I agree, you can't ignore that market. Absolutely not. That's, R&D and consumption taking place. But it is also a very challenging environment, I think, to operate. I don't know if you want to comment on that. You're not expected to. But that's at least our perspective. It's a fairly non-transparent with graphene materials in what kind of materials are actually being produced and actually being used in which applications. And having said that, obviously they are very advanced in some application areas, but it's just not easy to. It's not super easy to identify which is which, I guess, is the best way I can say it.
Yeah, I think that there is a it's a different culture. It's a different landscape. So I think you have to really know how to work. Like for example, working with Brazilians is different than working with Americans is different working with, right? So each culture has its own aspect. So you have really to know how to work with each different group, right? But I think when you talk about Asia, of course, China is key in many markets and in graphene, but also there are also very other vibrant markets. So there's a lot of technology going on in other regions, right? So if you look at what's happening in Japan, for sure, there's a lot of interesting developments in graphene in industries who could use graphene or are interested in using graphene, right? So it's also a very strong technological base, right? The same thing can be said about India, right? I think also, so right. Singapore recently is really, I think, picking up into the material science, right? You see a lot of the development being led by universities in Singapore, really having more and more investments and more. So I think there are potential in Asia as a region as a whole, and really connecting with these different locations, the different R&D centers, different client bases, really can add value to the whole graphene community, right? So I think really that's the best way of doing things.
Absolutely. I just have a couple more questions for you. One of our listeners is asking, and again, the company is only a month old,
Yeah.
so this is probably premature. But beyond graphene, are you looking at other 2D or advanced materials as part of a potential portfolio through your R&D efforts?
Okay. Again, as part of Gerdau Next, we have a whole chapter looking at let's see, new materials and new technologies. So for sure, we are looking at different materials or different opportunities in that chapter, right? These things are things we cannot disclose at the moment, but for sure there is interest in the company in looking at other materials as potential new markets, the potential new ventures or new companies, right? So for sure there's interest there, right?
Yeah. And a different question I'll have is obviously there's the Millennium Development Goals, CO2 reduction, more efficient processes, energy conservation, et cetera. What are you hearing from your customers? What do you see on the demand side for graphene to mitigate some of these issues? You mentioned battery energy storage, that's an obvious one, but other areas where there's some positive environmental impacts of using graphene to reach some of these important goals. What are you hearing from customers?
Sure. I think the first key aspect is that these topics have come have come to stay, right? I think we all as people, as executives, as companies, have to really look at this with the right care, the right attention, right? And I think it's something that I personally value strongly, and it's something that I think the company values very strongly. How do we have the best ESG approach to name it in a way, right? Overall, right? So I think when you look at graphene, we see it. Or I personally see it in two ways, right? The first one is if you look at the main, let's say the main benefit from graphene is how do you use it to enhance performance that in a way either will make things last longer, be used more, right? And so you can give several examples there. For example, again, concrete lasting longer, right? Of rubber components having a longer rubber artifacts or tires lasting longer, right? So that's one. Or how do you make things more efficient? So for example, you can have lubricants that will use less energy due to the reduced friction they'll provide to a motor, or use less fuel in a truck, right? So I think the main and interesting point about graphene is that one of its main benefits is the efficiency gain or the longer lasting gain you'll give to end products. So that for sure has a strong sustainable approach to it, right? So that's one point, and that's something that several clients, when we talk to them, really value of graphene, right? So I think all customers today are looking at, of course, what are the value proposition we can add to their product, what is the value can have in terms of driving costs or having a better, higher price products, but also how can you also bring more sustainable claims, sustainable products, and a greener footprint, right, to the whole approach. So that's something that's very valid. And for sure, if we can really look at this the correct way, I think there's also a key value proposition we can bring to the market. However, I think we can only do that. I think as a community, we have to take a step further, right? So one thing we already are looking at is how do we really look at the life cycle assessment of graphene as a whole, right? And how do we try to even enhance that even more? So I think one thing we have interest in is understanding what are the technologies there that can provide greener graphene, right? So there's a lot of very initial R&D work today being done on trying to take graphene out of recycling, which is a key area for us as a company, right? We do that in steel, right? How can you take graphene out of biosources also? So I think there are topics we're interested in as a company, right? And a second point is, again, how can we try to in a way, in a corporate level, really provide other ways of enhancing the sustainable claim that graphene has, right? So these are things that we already started working on. There's the initial projects, so I'm not able to share them now, but I'm sure that throughout this year we'll have some interesting developments, interesting news to the community of ways we're trying to tackle this to go beyond just the value proposition of having graphene as a efficient driver in inducing the CO2 emissions of end products, but also going a step further and making it really carbon neutral, carbon positive, negative in products we're applying it to, right?
Absolutely. Well, if we kind of summarize a little bit and bring this to a close, Alex, Gerdau Graphene is open for collaborations with all stakeholders in the field. If I heard you correctly, and we would certainly support and echo this, at this stage for graphene to really become adopted and to reach its potential, it means everybody needs to work together, everybody in the sector,
Sure.
Customers, producers, and everyone in between, to collaborate to unlock this potential. Because we know enough research has been done, enough testing has been done. We know that graphene works in these applications.
Exactly.
The next step is, I'm going to steal your phrase, how do we make it real, right? Like, how do you take it from theory to actually start using it and getting the benefits?
Exactly.
So do you have any closing comments you'd like to make?
I think that, I mean, you tackled the top two from my list, really. So I think that's it. So again, just echoing you, we're open to business, we're open to doing collaborative work, and we really believe in becoming a global hub for designing solutions with graphene. So we're reaching out to the community, and more than welcome to joining the supply chain, right, both ends, to really make sure we can make this scalable quickly. I think, as you mentioned, really our vision is there is enough space for the industry as a whole, and I think there is also a common mission today of how do we make it real. How does graphene can move from a buzzword to really a product claim, really. So going back to my CPG time, I think really my ambitions, how do I see claims and labels and seals made with graphene or free graphene inside in the market, in the shelves, right? That's really what we have to do and you can do, really, right? So that's our vision, right? And that, if that's well done, and that's well done with the right marketing, the right education, with the right value proposition, with the right scalability and the right application of technology, there is a huge potential market for all of us. And for sure, we believe that as in the past, right, plastics and steel and cement were key materials for the modern world we live today, graphene will be the next one, right? So I think it's very exciting to be opening a new industry. I think we were talking about this earlier, right? It is not every time you have the opportunity of taking part of the revolution in its beginning phase, right, and be able to surf it and to work with it, right, from beginning to end, or at least from the middle of the curve, right? So I think we have a great opportunity in our lifetime to see that and to be able to bring that to the communities we're in. So just we're open to working together with the different partners to do that, right? Making it real as quickly as we can.
Perfect. Well, Alex, thank you so much. And on behalf of the Graphene Council, this is our mission, is to help graphene become fully commercialized and adopted. If you're not a member of the Graphene Council, we certainly would welcome you to consider joining and being part of this community. We're very proud to have Gerdau Graphene, and we wish you nothing but immense success in your endeavors. So we're happy to work with you and support you in those efforts any way we can. And so with that, I want to say thank you, Alex. Thank you for sharing your time and insights with us today. I'm sure it was hugely valuable to everyone. And we are going to close today's webinar. You'll receive a copy of the handout slides from today, but more importantly, a recording of this conversation that you're free to use, share, and refer to in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you again, Terence. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Take care. Obrigado.
De nada.